you get there. What was your first role, your first purpose when you guys were there? What was going on?
As far as what was our team's mission and
Yeah, what
in
was
that in that
when you
regard.
what was your mission when you got there? What was your was it?
Gotcha. Um, yeah. So at the time, the strategy was to enable and build up the Afghani army and the Afghani forces to enable them to defend themselves. So I was assigned to what was called a DSP, a district stability platform, which is essentially a small compound of about 50 or 60 men out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded just by Afghanis. And on that little compound, we had Afghan special forces who we would accompany and lead onto combat operations. And so our mission was to build up their warfighting capability, but then the overall mission was to work with them to stop the weapons and personnel coming in from Pakistan, from the Haqqani network. The Haqqani network are a Pashtun tribe that operate both in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. That's their sort of ancient tribal land. They don't really recognize the borders. And so our DSP, which is this little compound, was right at the mouth of this large valley that went right into Pakistan. And so, but we were also positioned right between that sort of funnel of weapons and manpower and this large U.S. military base where there's aircraft and there's helicopters and there's, hundreds of soldiers and, they've got a lot of different things going on at that very large base. So our larger mission was to basically defend that base long enough so they could, I guess, break it down and burn it and leave. Because at the time we were drawing down troops. It was very weird. We were fighting in this war where we knew in 6 months we're all going to be out of here, and we knew that area was lost. It was just completely lost. Like the Taliban were going to take it over,
Right.
and take it back.
Was this going on at the same time when Saddam Hussein was still in power, or was it afterwards?
No, so Saddam Hussein had been killed, years earlier in Iraq, and so he didn't have any influence on what was going on in Afghanistan.
This is all. This is all the fallout from all that is really what this was about at the time.
Um, so the reason we went into Afghanistan was because the Taliban, who were like the local, I guess the best way to describe it, they're the local warlords who control Afghanistan, the entire country. They had harbored Osama bin Laden, who had, obviously planned and coordinated and conducted, or not personally conducted, but the 9/11 attacks. That's why we went into Afghanistan. The Iraq situation was not necessarily linked to Afghanistan in any way. So Saddam Hussein had no real bearing on what was going on in Afghanistan. Two totally separate countries. They don't share a border,
Right.
but it's all the same. It's all the same, same part of the world.
Right,
Kind of similar enemies.
but there were certain influences, with Iraq and Afghanistan, like why we were in that section of the world. I mean, were you briefed at all geopolitically why you were there, or you were just briefed, this is our mission, this is what we need to do? And I guess the next question is what did you learn from being on the ground? I mean, was your perception of why we were there, did that change why you were there fighting, doing your mission, or you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get you. So to answer your first question, yeah, I mean, we were briefed a little bit geopolitically on like the overall concept of why we were there in Afghanistan. But I mean, by the time I got there in 2014, though, I mean, we had been there since I think late 2001. So we'd already been there for, well over a decade. And so we all kind of understood already what was going on. There wasn't a big brief where they talked about 9/11 or anything, because we all already kind of knew that. But yeah, it was. I think my perspective changed when I got on the ground, only in as much as I started to realize that while our intentions were good and the overall strategy was good, The only way to make it actually happen would be to do a couple things. One, be prepared to be there for 25 or 30 years and control the entire area. And two, take out occupy all the tribal lands in all the neighboring countries as well. Right. So if you did that and you sat there for 30 years and re-educated the population, not re-educated, but built schools and let a generation and a half of kids grow up under relatively peaceful conditions, let them be educated on, I guess the values of democracy. Right. Then you could have some kind of a lasting impact. But this isn't World War II. You're not going in there and fighting for 4 or 5 years until you reach Berlin and then it's over. Right. It's like, no, this will last for generations and generations. And so again, our strategy, I think, was correct, but the resources and the ability to stay there for 30 years in an entire area, and not to mention you have to get the tribal areas that are across these national borders, which we as Americans recognize, but it doesn't recognize. They don't care. Little lines in the sand. They don't care about it all. They're like, hey man, my people have lived over there and over here for the last 3,000 years of recorded history. So yeah, you can draw some line in the sand, but we're still going to cross it. Like, we don't care. And there's no security forces can get out there. You're in the middle of the mountains or whatever.
And when the military did go into the Middle East during that time, it wasn't really sold to the public as a 30-year war. It was sold as, we need to go in there, we need to stabilize, we need to stop terrorism, we need to get out. So there were a lot of other background reasons why all that fighting was going on in the Middle East, and sounds like you learned a fair bit more about it when you started experiencing what was going on. Do you think that promoting democracy and stability in that region was the main purpose to go in, or was it to secure the area so the flow of oil kept on going? What was your impression? I mean, I don't think anybody has, as a layman looking in, people watch the news, they read the papers, nobody knows exactly what's going on, but someone that's being there and is quite as intelligent as you are can start formulating a little bit of a map in your mind about really what was going on. What do you think about some of that?
So I have two main thoughts, and I think the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq are two very different animals. So the war in Afghanistan, I believe was worthwhile and was a good thing to go in there and take out these terrorists and not allow them to have a safe haven to conduct another attack of that magnitude in the United States. So in that regards, yes, I agree with that. However, I don't believe that when we went in there, we understood the magnitude and the length of what was going to be required of us. Think about in the aftermath of World War II, we actually occupied all of Japan and completely rebuilt the country, set up a whole new government, conducted war crimes trials, and then I think within like 4 or 5 years, I believe, we were out of there by the early 50s, or by 1950 or something like that. We were out of there, and Japan is this thriving nation. That's our point of view. That's our view of history. When we went into Afghanistan, we're like, oh, we're just going to do the same thing in Afghanistan, but that's not realistic. So I think the objective was to secure Afghanistan, help make them stabilized, and make sure that the military there can or not allow more terrorist training camps and things like that to happen there. Now, Iraq, different situation. The situation in Iraq, I believe we went in on seas of we were looking for weapons of mass destruction. Right. And I believe a lot of that had to do with, again, stabilizing the region. And I feel I'm 50-50 on it. I can see the argument to go in and take out Saddam Hussein. I totally see it. I get it. I get where we're coming from there. But I can also see the argument of when people say, like, hey, why did we go in there? That's a bit ridiculous. I honestly can see both sides of the coin. But I do think it's important, though, that we have some kind of a presence in the Middle East to stabilize it because of the oil. Okay, so for example, why aren't we in Africa conducting these large scale wars in Africa? Right. Well, there's just as much evil, just as much, maybe not weapons of mass destruction, but death and slaughter and rape and murder on these horrible scales going on all the time, all over the continent. Why aren't we there helping them?
Right.
Well, the reason is, you were kind of alluding to, there's more of a reason to be in the Middle East, and it's to do with the stability of oil. Now, a lot of people look and say, oh, like, we're just fighting wars over, there's no reason to do that. Well, to an extent, there kind of is, because we and the Middle East and the rest of the world, we all form a kind of chaotic relationship, right? So whatever happens to one affects the other. And so if the Middle East is unstable and it's just going absolutely haywire, well, if they just suddenly decided to cut off oil to the United States, let's say, or cause some big war where oil stopped flowing to the U.S., and give it, I mean, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but dude, give it 3 days of people lined up in the streets. Our economy stops, our vehicles stop, no one's going to work anymore. We're standing in line outside of gas stations hoping to get a half a gallon of gas, right? We would be screaming for war. We would be screaming to go in and invade these countries, because that would then restabilize everything. So war that's motivated kind of by oil isn't just about oil. It's more about the economy, and it's about the entire welfare of our society.
Sure, and stabilizing. The question is really, how unstable the region was, before we went in, and I don't think anybody will really know that. And obviously 9/11 was a catalyst to move in that direction because of what happened in this country and that horrible tragedy, and maybe there was more thought by the government that more terror cells could pop up, and more tragedy could occur. I don't think anybody would know. I don't know if you know, but it's definitely a very, very confusing topic, but interesting to hear, your perspective on how your mindset might have changed. I mean, once you got there, did you say to yourself, what the hell am I doing here? Or
when I was in Afghanistan?
Yeah. I mean, were you aligned with your purpose emotionally, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I was totally aligned with my purpose emotionally. Absolutely. I was there. I was committed. I got it. I understood it. And I was like, okay, I see what we have to do here. I see what's going on. With that being said, though, there were certainly some, I guess, frustration, because we were basically, we had been told, when you guys go out here, you're going to be out here for a few months. And then at the end of this few months, you're going to hop on a bunch of helicopters, burn this entire place to the ground, and you're going to fly back to the big base, and you'll never return here again. So it was weird, kind of fighting a war that you kind of lost in a way. Because I mean, the Taliban control the area. We want to talk about a briefing. When we first got to Afghanistan, they had an intel person come in. They put up a big map on the wall of the entire of all of Afghanistan, and they started showing us all the different regions where American troops were present. And then we were like, okay, well, what about these other areas where the Americans aren't present? Like, oh, those are all 100% Taliban controlled, and we're in the process of losing this area. We're in the process of losing this area. And they just pointed it everywhere on the map, and it was like, oh, dude, like we're not going to be able to control the territory. So I have two important thoughts that people need to understand about, I guess, modern warfare and this kind of war. Into the future, I think our current policy is good, where you have so for example, in Afghanistan, we have Bagram Air Base, which is this very large. It's almost like a small city near Kabul, and you have aircraft there. You have special operations troops there. You've got medical people there, and so you have this quick strike capability. You can be anywhere in the country, take out anybody who causes any real problems, and you have special forces and rangers out there constantly putting pressure on the bad guys in these different areas within Afghanistan. So under those conditions, training camps and all that stuff are not going to be able to flourish, right? And it's a very small contingent of volunteer troops that really want to be there. These special operations guys, fighter pilots, they want to be there. They want to go hunt down the bad guys, right? But then going back to the Iraq thing a little bit, hindsight's always 20/20, but I think we have to learn from history as well. So in the current situation, we have like Assad, who's in Syria, and he's this absolutely terrible, horrible human being, right? Doing terrible things to his people. Very much the same way that Saddam Hussein was. So the question is, okay, so do we go take out Assad? Well, the truth, or my opinion, is when you look at the Middle East and you look at the cultures that are there, and you look look at sort of the ancient power hierarchies that have been there for thousands of years. As Americans, we look at our history only goes back a couple hundred years. These other people, their history goes back thousands of years. Right. And there's a way of doing things, like they're walking down the same streets that, in Egypt or whatever, now they're walking down the same streets that Alexander the Great walked down, and Ptolemy, right? So it's a very different concept of change happens a lot slower. And so with that being said, if you go in there, with that being said, there a lot of these cultures, not everybody, but a lot of these cultures are simply not ready for democracy as we understand it.
Right.
Unfortunately, the reality is a strong, sometimes abusive leader, unfortunately, is the most stable thing that could happen there. Right. Because look at what happened to Iraq in 2000. We go in 2003, we take out Saddam, we're there for 8 years, and 2011, we, pick up and leave. Well, now there's this huge power vacuum, and they're not sitting there going like, oh, let's have elections. The Americans are gone. It's all good. That's fine. Let's have some elections and let's modernize. No. Like the culture and the society and the terror elements in there are way too strong to have any kind of
reorganization occur.
I guess organized elections or
a lot of the hate that occurred towards the West probably occurred just because of our continued involvement in the Middle East after the last 20, 30 years. And as you and I have discussed, most likely we revolved around trying to stabilize the area, but also because there's a resource there that's very important to the world geopolitical economy. I get that. I don't want to go off too far into a political discussion because this interview is also really about you as well, or it really is about you. So you're there and you're, fighting alongside your other partners, other soldiers. How are those guys feeling about all this? Is everybody in it together, or are people like, what the hell am I doing here? Do you see some of that amongst the ranks?
As far as the SEALs were concerned, no, man, we were stoked to be there. We were all about it. But the Afghan forces that we were working with, they knew we were leaving in a few months. And so what actually ended up happening was there was actually a lot of thievery that was happening. They knew we're leaving. They know we're going to take all of our gear with us. And so everything down from like batteries to fuel to, ammunition, they started stealing it because they're like, dude, you guys are going to leave us in not even 6 months, 3 months. And, we're going to be left without all this stuff. And so there was a huge morale problem with them. And discipline problem because they were actually going to our vehicles. We'd fuel up a vehicle preparing to go. This had actually happened. We fueled up our vehicles the night before, 100% ready to go. And in the morning at like 3 a.m., we were setting off to go on another mission, and we were going to drive to our target. Well, we get driving, and one of the Afghan vehicles up front just stops working magically. And we're like, well, why isn't it working? So we all have to get out of our vehicles. We're sitting there. It's actually raining. And in the night, we're just sitting there in this alley or this
because somebody took a distributor cap off
area. Well, what happened was they siphoned out the fuel. One of the Afghanis went there, and the night before the mission, because he knew there was a full tank of gas, he siphoned out all the fuel, and so he could go sell it on the market somewhere. And they would do the same thing in firefights. We would get into gunfights and down. I have helmet cam footage of this. It was the most bizarre thing.
Where are my bullets?
Contact. Yeah, well, no, you look down and they're just like sitting there. They're not shooting. They're not returning fire. They would literally just like sit down and like just camp out while we're taking like, contact from multiple angles. And the reason was, after the gunfight, they would come up to us and say, "Hey, we shot all of our bullet ammo." We're like, "No, you didn't. Like, we saw you. Like, you weren't shooting at all, man." They
were saving the ammo.
But they're saving the ammo, taking whatever they could get. Yeah.
All right. So how does 6 months in Afghanistan turned into 6.4 years? Did you go back and forth, or you were actually there for all that time? How often did you come back?
Oh, no. I went to Afghanistan one time, and that was right at the end. That was my first deployment, and that was right at the end of Naval Special Warfare's involvement there, at least for the vanilla teams. So when I returned from Afghanistan, you begin another of 18 months of training. So you get a whole new group of you're assigned to a new group of SEALs. Senior leaders that got promoted, they're moving on to other locations. You get new guy to training, and you form a whole new platoon. And then at that point, you spend 18 months relearning everything that you already know, but like you're getting up to speed on the latest tactics. You're learning how to work together with your unit with this new platoon. And then my second deployment at the end of those 18 months was actually to Southeast Asia, where basically what we did for 6 months was training allied forces to help them combat terrorism. But it wasn't there wasn't a whole lot of actual missions happening, and there was never like a
So how did you
get into combat or anything like that.
So